and then share my screen. Whoops. Okay. So today we are going to kind of recap on some stuff that we've already been learning a little bit. So last week we talked about the how to use state and use effect, and how we have to talk to React in a way that allows React to kind of see exactly the data that we want change, and then and React will then kind of change what's rendering based on these types of based on this data that we give to it. We do that through hooks, use state being the biggest one. When things change in use state, then React then knows how to re-render. And then use effect is a way for us to run side effects whenever those changes do happen and whenever a re-render happens. So we kind of did that by building this little counter application. And remember, we had like event count and username. And actually, I implemented like a little spinner that's now on timeout. So go back and take a look at that. And then now we can reset, increment, refresh, and then still be able to increment from where we left off because of our local storage. So that's what we did. We're going to do something very similar. We're going to build a form. And one of the concepts that we haven't really gotten into yet is this idea of like these are components, and components, you're able to pass data through components using props. So like for instance, in this case, we only really used an app component, but then whenever I implemented this after class, I implemented a spinner component, and you can see it's down here implemented like JSX. So I want to kind of cover that, and then using that to build a form, and that form will have some conditional rendering. And our goal is to kind of work towards building actually like a kind of like a COVID form, like it would recommend what you should do based on your inputs. And this is kind of like a flow chart that will help us like build that. So very, very common thing for me to do at work is to like get with product people or UX people or whatever, and then like figure out the flow of like how people are supposed to, like how an application should work, and then build around that. Like I always say that like software is only as good as the processes that are like underneath it, and software can be really powerful, but if it's not thought through, then it really doesn't mean anything. So like this is all taken from the CDC guidelines. Like it's very, very kind of basic once you kind of like understand what's going on. And we just want to kind of start the process of building like a little form that kind of steps you through how you might answer these questions, and then like shows you a certain question based on that. So we'll kind of we definitely won't get through every single one of these, but we'll break up our inputs into components, and then that way we can then see how we can build a complex form using multiple components. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a new React application. And I'm going to do that inside of the OK Coders curriculum. So if you remember, I'm going to cd into my dev, which has OK Coders. In the curriculum folder, I'm going to go into module 4. Cool, because this will give me everything that Zach has added. And then I'm going to cd into day 3. Uh, yeah, so this is kind of, I'll probably end up changing this, but that's the README. So, okay, so if you remember, what is the application that allows me to create a new React application? You remember?
NPM.
I have to use npm, but I'm actually using npx, and there's a specific npx package that I use. npx is a way of using an npm package without it like installing everything. So you'll see that here and there in documentation. But I'm going to do npx, and there's one particular React specific application that will help me create it. Remember what it is?
Create React app.
That's exactly right. Create React. And then I'll say like I don't know, call it like COVID. Like I don't know, recommender. So I'm going to move pretty fast so we can get as far as we can. If you need me to slow down, just interrupt me. Normally I try to make sure everyone's keeping up, but we have a lot to cover. So here's the deal. If you have not done any homework, or if you've not started to work on this on your own, or if you you know, haven't gotten your hands dirty and played around with this and tried to build stuff, we are officially at the point, we've kind of been at that point, but we're officially at the point where you will fall behind. So here's the deal. You all need to be putting in effort to get anything out of this. Like whether you do or not is like, it's whatever. It's up to you. We are here to help. We give you resources. We try to give you as much curriculum as possible. But we're kind of at a point where we need to start like building some things. So my point is, you need to be getting firsthand experience with this code, and like you're going to be using concepts from all the way back in JavaScript 1, and actually from the very beginning of the modules. So fast forward, if you've continued to not get your hands dirty and play around with code, then like you're continuing to fall behind, and that's going to like really come out in this module. It probably already has, starting like last class. You might have felt it a little bit. So it's not saying like that you should be like you know, feeling any which way about it. Just the idea is just recognize that that's the case. If that's where you're at, ask for help, ask for extra time from an instructor or a mentor, and you'll catch up. We'll catch you up. So, but so that's by way of saying I'm going to move fast here. We're kind of like plateauing a little bit, where like we'll just kind of reintroduce the same concepts using like we'll kind of reintroduce the same concepts in different contexts so that, you know, they kind of solidify. Like for instance, I think on Saturday, Zach's going to cover making a fetch API call or something with UseEffect. So we'll revisit UseEffect, and then he'll revisit forms even, I think. So we're trying to hammer on the more fundamental things that you'll need to know in React. But again, we're even at this point now where if you're you know, like behind, then it's gonna be hard to stay caught up. So just continue to put in that effort and ask for help. We're happy to make things clear and give it extra time. And frankly, we don't really get asked a whole lot. Like a lot of you all don't really ask us a lot for extra time, or I know some people do office hours, but a lot of times people don't. So anyways, we're here to help. Put in the extra time. You'll get a lot out of it. It's worth it. Coding is awesome, and that's why we love teaching it. But it does require like firsthand experience with this. So you can't just watch me do it and then expect to get a lot out of it. So, okay, putting away the soapbox. So I'm going to CD into the COVID recommender. If you remember, there's a bunch of sort of think I can do yarn list, or let's say yarn. No, that's going to do yarn install. Yarn is exactly like npm, so when you see yarn, it's the same thing as doing npm or npm start. Oh yeah, npm start, I can do that. So I'm going to do npm start. These are the scripts that I can run here. You really only need to run like these two, npm start and npm build. npm start's going to start my development server. And then the first thing I actually need to do is I actually need to change this. I need to open up code here. And this will open up the COVID recommender inside of there. This is the application that it bootstraps. And by that, I mean, this is the application that gets loaded by default. I could do yarn start again. So right now, this is disconnected. So if I restart this, it's going to say unable to connect. The reason is because the development server is not there anymore. But if I do npm run start here, then it'll start it back again and open up a new tab. And then if I refresh, it'll still stay up. So, okay. So first thing I'm going to do is get rid of some of the boilerplate. I don't really need a lot of this. So I'm going to get rid of this, probably this, probably this, probably this, and this. And then index.js, okay, app.js. I'm going to get rid of this and just put something along the lines of hello world, just to make sure we're good to go. So I do have an error. I'm going to look, so COVID recommender report web vitals. I think it's because I deleted this. And so if I restart and then get rid of this part, that's good. And then in app.js, let's see. Oh, there is no app.css anymore. So, okay, so now it's compiled successfully. Whenever you get green, that means you're good to go. There's no errors. And hello worlds, I meant world, but hello worlds is there, okay? So, okay, so let's like think about kind of what we're going to build and maybe like, so one thing that's really, really common with programming is this idea of like decompose the problem. There is an image of this somewhere. I forget where it is, but it's this idea that like any, you know, what's the best way to consume an elephant one bite at a time. That's a way of saying, hey, look, you have these big problems, like all of this is a big application that I want to build. It is important that you, in your brain, try to kind of identify these boundaries of, okay, well, where's my starting place, right? And kind of decompose the problem into more bite-sized chunks and then work to build on top of that. So for me, I think the first thing, you know, I'm looking at this and the biggest thing is that these are all questions, right? So the application needs to know some information, some yes/no information on how to proceed. So to me, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, that automatically to me means there's going to be like a form of some sort, and then I can do form of that in like checkboxes or radios. I could do it with text, whatever. But I know that I'm going to create a form, and then I know that I'm going to conditionally render. So it's okay. That's great. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to make a new folder here, and I'm going to call it components. And then this is how I create new components in an application. So for me, I know that the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to wrap this in a form tag. One thing to note is that you don't have to use like base HTML in React. Like there's a lot of workarounds and a lot of code out there where you'll see like people using divs in place of certain things, and people not using forms and putting inputs without proper form controls and all this kind of stuff. The basic rule of thumb as a junior developer is that you should lean on the recommended style of creating your HTML, structuring your HTML. And the reason is primarily it has to do with accessibility. So your browser, whether you know it or not, and a lot of us are not, as far as I know, we're not, like blind or deaf or, have impairments that will like really, really hinder our ability to use an application. But obviously there's a lot of people out there who do. And so browsers are exceptionally smart at actually helping you along the way with that, and they do a lot of things for you. The way that they do that is by reading what should be expected HTML. So for instance, if I have an input here, it should be within a form tag. That's one common thing. If I have a clickable button, it should be an actual button tag rather than a div tag that's clickable with a click event on it or something like that. So rule of thumb, use your more recommended HTML elements, and that will go a long way. Okay, so the first thing I'm noticing is that, like, with my, actually, that's, I can actually just do like a close here. So with my little flowchart here, I know that I have several questions that I'm going to ask, and like, there's several kind of ways of doing that, and I'll show you how you might do that. But instead of, actually, I'll show you now. So there's a way of doing like input with label form control. This is the recommended way of building like a form, and we're actually going to do something like this. What's the accessibility? Okay, yeah, so this is like label for label tag for that kind of stuff. And then there's also an element called the form control tag. Oh, I guess form control is not like an actual tag. It's more of like a utility within React. So we'll just worry about inputs and labels at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we're doing multiple inputs here. And and within each input, we have to have a label also. So instead of doing multiple inputs and multiple labels with like a BR tag or something here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to build them all as one component, and then it'll make our code a lot cleaner. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do create a form input JSX tag. And then the first thing I want to do is say, okay, like, what is my question? So then I'm going to say, like, label text equals, have you tested positive for COVID-19? Okay. This does not exist yet. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that oftentimes whenever I'm trying to build an application and whenever I'm trying to decompose the problem, like in this case, I just need a starting point, right? And that'll get me going and create momentum in my building. In this case, the way that I'm going to get momentum is I'm going to first start with a component that kind of represents in my head what's going on. In this case, this form input's going to represent like a input and button, or sorry, an input and label pair, like this. So, or like one of these guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say form input. This could be anything. This could be foo bar, but in my head, I'm labeling it kind of like I would a function name or a variable name in a way that is like helpful to what I'm trying to build. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to then go back and actually create it. So now that I have this thing, I'm going to reverse engineer what it is and what I need to actually do. So what I'm going to do, also, okay, so the thing that I want to point out too is that we have this idea of exports and imports. So import React, import app. all this is this is a way of creating modular files that all end up kind of coming together, which we've not seen this before really. This is just modules, but the syntax is pretty simple. Is import from some file or whatever, or in this case a npm package, and then we can export in order to see that. So I'll show you how that works. So in general, rule of thumb is to like keep your files as short and simple as you possibly can. So I usually, it's rule of thumb also that like this is called app.js. This should represent just the app component. This should only have one component in it. And in my components folder, I can add another file and I can call that form input, .jsx. And this, I can now create the function that I need, okay? So the way I create a component in React is pretty easy. I just create a function that's named that name. And it's important that you keep consistent with the file name, because otherwise you'll confuse yourself. You'll try to import it somewhere and then not realize what you're doing. So in this case, I'm going to do form input.js, or sorry, function form input. That's going to be a function, so it's going to be like this. And then I'm going to return the HTML markup that I want to fit in right here. What is that going to be? Well, I'm going to copy it, say, from like right here. Okay. Just as an example. Okay. And then you're going to read this. They must have one parent element. What that means is that I can't have two side by side, so I have to wrap this. In this case, I'm going to wrap this in a tag that looks like this. It's an empty tag. This should be working. What's going on here? There we go. Okay, so this is just returning first name. Okay, so there's two things I want to point out. One is that this is saying that it's never used. Two, this is just static information, so we need to find a way to make this more dynamic to where it changes depending on the information we send to it. And then also here, this is still not defined, meaning it's not being imported properly. So what you can do is you can actually like click on this little light bulb. On mine, you can do, on my computer, it's command period, but you can also do control period, and that will also give you options. But normally what happens here is that it'll say import form input from form input.jsx component / form input.jsx. The reason it's not doing that is because we actually didn't export this. So I can do one of two things. I can either do export default form input down here, and then I can see import form input from here like this. I didn't do that right. It should just go at the top here. But the other option is to just, this is what I normally do, is just to do it at the function level here, export default function form input, and just kind of do it that way. Okay. And export default is what allows you to import it like this, as opposed to you might see syntax that looks like import from blah, 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 toolbar. And this, whatever is inside of here, is because it'd be without the default. So if I did this, then I'd have to actually wrap that like that. So, but it's pretty customary to, I'm treating this file as a component file, so therefore I'm exporting just one thing, namely the actual component itself. And so it's more customary to do like this for your own structure. So, okay, great. So, the other thing I want to do, so here's the thing, is I want to, let's just do this. Let's just put 3 different things down there. We're going to look at this and say, okay, have you come into close contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19? into close contact with someone who, and then let's say, are you fully vaccinated? By the way, again, this is fully from the CDC website. Okay, cool. So now let's see what this looks like. Okay, and then the other thing I'm going to do is I am going to add a BR, and then another BR. I think it's just /BR for React. Or the BR/. I always forget. BR/. Okay. Let's say that I wanted to add some spacing to the label. I could do something like, I could do style here. So I could do style equals, let's do padding right 10 pixels. What's going on? Style prop. Oh, it must be an object. Okay, yeah. So instead of doing inline like this, you actually do it like this. So padding right 10. Actually, I think let's do 10 as a number. See what that does. Yeah, so 10 as a number interprets its pixels. I could also do something like 10 pixels, and it would interpret it properly. But I'm just going to do padding right 10. So instead of doing, so this is kind of this concept of what we call CSS in JavaScript, CSS in JS. You get different opinions on how you're supposed to do CSS in React, but in general, you'll probably be mostly using some sort of component or design library that kind of has its own opinion on that. And so it's important that you know the different options that are out there. But you know, like for instance, Zach's gonna show you a Bootstrap implementation, like what you saw in module 1. But it's going to be purely React components that are kind of pre-built. And you'll kind of like import them exactly like I'm importing this. You'll just be importing it from a third-party library. But you do need to know a little bit of like how that does work. But right now, this is going to be super basic form, so I'm not super worried about it. We'll just start with this here. But okay, but notice though, so I have this idea of labeled text, and that was just something I threw in there. Have you tested positive for COVID-19? But all these are rendering as first name. So what if it, given the homework and what you know now, what is one way that I can hook up this right here to my form input component here? Does anyone have any guesses? Any guesses at all? So remember that these components are just functions. So if this components are just functions, what do you think these attributes here that we're adding looks like HTML to us, but what do you think that they are? What do functions take?
A parameter or an argument?
They do take an argument. Parameter and argument you can use interchangeably. There is a technical difference, but I know what you mean, which is the most important thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so anything that I put here, anything that comes in here actually comes in as an argument here, but it comes in the same object called props. Okay. So let's open this up and see. So it comes as this is an object, foo bar, I'm cool, false, have you tested positive, have you come into contact. So notice that this only has the label text property here. That's because I only have these other properties on the top one. And so it's calling these functions as it's rendering them and showing you what the props are. And it's showing it to you everywhere that it's implemented. So I have it implemented here 1, 2, 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's actually showing it twice for each one. And there's a reason for that, but we won't get super into that. But my point is to show you that like it comes in as this props object, and you can remember that you can do something called destructuring. So I can either do something like this where I can say, you know, props dot label text, let's say, or I could destructure it up here and say label text. And then similarly, if for some reason someone did not pass in label text, I can set it as a default of a space here. Sorry, not a space, an empty string is what I mean. So the other thing I would want to point out is that, so if you remember, I think it was Saturday, I mentioned that like, or maybe Wednesday, I mentioned that some of the properties that are in HTML do not translate properly to JavaScript because there's reserved keywords. A good example is the word class. So you can't use class as a property. In this case, this is one of them. It's for. For is a reserved keyword for for loops in JavaScript. So we actually have to use HTML4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to HTML4. And by the way, the for attribute or HTML4 attribute is very important because it actually tells JavaScript that this is attached to this. So what that means is that whatever the name attribute is, actually, sorry, whatever the ID is, the HTML4 should be the same. And theoretically, whenever you focus on these, it would focus on the actual input itself. So imagine radio buttons where, like, you know, they're really small and, you know, you have to click these. Well, you actually can click on the label whenever you are clicking, whenever you're clicking through, and that has to do with the way that the label is used. So if you weren't using a label, or if you weren't using this attribute, you couldn't actually like click on here to do anything. Notice how it's not going up to that top one anymore. You'd actually have to target your mouse to the actual little bitty dot. So it's always better to use labels and make sure that HTML knows what the label is to the input. And the reason it's going to the top one is because it's the first one that's finding that has the same ID. They actually have the same ID, which is not valid HTML actually. So, okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I have this question that I need to pass to it. I have, you know, I have to receive input from the user and all that, and I need to make this more dynamic. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just say, like, here, instead of saying first name, I'm just going to say whatever the label text is. Okay. And then I can do something like this as well. I think you can, I can also do something like this. And then I can change this back to input if we want. So, okay. So I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to say that the name. I'm going to get rid of name and ID. Actually, I think. Actually, I'm going to get rid of name, and then we can name this whatever we want. Name equals self test, and then you could do like name equals name here, you know, and then that has to come from up here. You could add any number of HTML attributes you want to pass down to it. I'm actually just going to do something like this. So, okie dokie. So, right now we're just kind of building this form. Let's say that we actually don't want either that we want actually this to be conditionally rendered based on what is answered here. So in other words, let's say that instead of the "Are you fully vaccinated?" question, which is over here, we actually asked, "Do you have symptoms?" And let's say that we wanted this to be a radio button, yes or no, and we wanted the next question to render the right question based on what was answered here, okay? So the way we're going to do, the first thing we need to do is what? Does anyone have a guess on what the first thing we need to do in order to do that is? We have zero data. We have zero way of telling React how to re-render right now. We have no state. We just have props. But how do you think we need to then tell React how to render differently based on the values of this input here?
Use state?
Yes. Okay. So what do you think use state is going to be? What kind of state should it be?
Null?
Okay, we can do null. We can start that way. But where am I going to use state, right? So like, let's just say for the sake of argument, we just call this answer one and then set answer one. So remember that we use set answer one to change the state. Where would we do that at? What do we usually attach to inputs?
Like labels?
No, typically not labels, but we can put it in a event handler, can't we? So instead of this, we're just going to see what the value of our input is. We're actually going to do this. And then we need to import this. I don't know why this is not. Well, it's pretty easy. We just do import, and it's not a default, so we need to use state from React. Okay. Okay, so now we have a bit of an issue here, though. This is a common issue that you will run into. So in React, we want to handle state up at this level, but we're actually not receiving any input until we get to this level. Because this as a form input does not have an onChange prop. Okay. We could do onChange handle change here. Okay. That's all well and good. And we'll get here. But like, let's go to our application and nothing's happening over here. Okay. That's because we did onChange, but nothing is changing at this level. There's nothing changing here at this level. The only thing that can change in that way, that can fire that event, is actually an input, an HTML input. So how do we get this level down to this level? We've already done once before. So what do we need to do?
Is it set answer 1?
Not set answer 1 here. We already have this. This we can kind of ignore for now. We're just trying to get the event handler to work. So what I can do is I can do onChange, and I'm even seeing it here, onChange here on the input. What am I going to pass to onChange on the input side? If I'm getting something here, it's got to come in as a prop also. So it's going to come in up here. And it says onChange, but onChange is kind of a reserved kind of attribute for specifically for HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this handle change also. And then I'm going to do handle change up here. And then I can do handle change. Now what's going to happen? Well, I'm going to it's not going to do it on that one because I don't have it implemented on the second one here. Okay, so what happened is, and this is how you have to kind of think in React, okay? In React, you have this kind of component structure. You have these higher components where you're handling state because you have to do some fancy, fetching data, saving data, all that kind of stuff. And then you have these components that are handling more of the HTML side. Well, in order to hook those together, we have to use props, and I can pass down props to the input, including functions. So I have my change handler here. This is going to be set answer 1 to e.target.value, whatever I'm putting in. And then I'm going to pass this function down to a prop here, and then use the prop here on the prop here. Like, you can pass down, I could pass it down as many times as I wanted to. Like, this could be a custom component, then the next one could be a custom component. Like, we're building this large kind of tree-like structure where things are nested deep within one another in order to like build this more complex application. So this is very common in React, is passing change handlers down, event handlers down, use state handlers down, all that kind of stuff. So the way I always think about it is I try to keep a certain type of function name, in my case handle whatever, handle change, handle click, whatever, and I'm going to pass that down, and this is a custom property, so I'm going to keep that as handle change as well, just kind of keep it consistent. But then at some level I'm going to pass it to onChange, and onChange is the actual HTML elements handler. That's what, like, the on indicates to me that it's the HTML element. So really the reality is that you can name all this stuff anything you want. You could name this on change if you want. I'm just doing it my way because that signals to me, oh, hey, this is not some you know, out of the box component or HTML component. This is probably something custom that I've already written or someone else has written, and so this is just going to be continued to pass down. This tells me that I'm done passing down, that I've reached the place that I need to pass down to, from component to component. So again, I have a function on my input. I need to give onChange a function in order to receive the data that's being input into that input field into my code. So I give it a change handler. Well, I don't want to track the state here. I want to track it up here. So what I'm going to do is create a prop. That prop is then passed down here. Okay. So the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure this is typing right here. But honestly, if I'm only ever going to want the user to type yes or no, I'm going to then change this to like a radio button. And then I think I can do input type radio. And with input type radio, they all have the same label, but they have different values. So name, they all have the same name, but they have different values. So I'm going to do something like this. This is where I want to say like name equals, let's say, self-test. I'm going to get the name here as a property as well. And then I want the name to get passed down, just like onChange and stuff. Name equals. And what this does is this keeps them consistent. I want the value I'm actually going to look something up. I think there's maybe a better way to do it, labels for that. Oh, they can do field set. Okay. So that's actually what we're going to do. We're going to do field set here. We're going to do legend. We're going to get rid of HTML4 there, but we're going to say label yes, and then label no. Value equals, I think we can do true here, and then value equals false, and then do no. So I'm essentially creating a form input component, and really I'm just going to change this to radio yes no input, yes no radio input, something like that. And then I can rename this and this, and then this and this, just to make it clear as to what I'm doing. I'm also going to rename the file name, so not to confuse myself. So in React, every time you change that, you probably want to rename the file name as well. So we should be good to go there. Let's see what this looks like now. So okay, this looks pretty good, but it's selecting them both. Okay, well, the reason is that there's no value there. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we are going to, I think, let's see. This one's configured properly. I see what's going on. And then I think that this is also, I can do type of and make sure this is true or false. It's a string, actually. Okay, so, okay. There's a reason that I wanted to do that. Okay. Okay, recap. So what I did is I reset kind of this to kind of a better set of HTML. I found that just on the Mozilla documents. I mean, honestly, like I always learn new stuff about like HTML and stuff, so this makes a lot of sense. I needed something to kind of like tell me, okay, like that it wasn't a label for the question, and then have a label for the actual like what the radio button value is. In this case, what I'm telling in HTML is here's the label, yes, but in my code I actually want to handle it a little bit differently. I want to handle like the I want to handle I want to handle it as a true or false rather than what is in the label. So if this were a different value, like let's say that like in this case, I had Huey, Dewey, and Louie, not yes or no, then you could give the value here and it would handle it as the small string Dewey, and this is the label. So the idea here is that like with radios, you have to control both like what your code sees as well as like what the user sees, just because they're kind of a funky like type of input. But so I just refactored this part to do that, to look a little bit better. And then I went ahead and renamed it so it was more clear as to what it was doing. This is a yes/no radio input now. And then I have to give it a name. So I have to give each of these a unique name, because remember, this is being used 3 different times. So this can have nothing specific in it. This is all generic. But what is specific is what I pass into these variables here. So in this case, I'm going to change, what's going on here. I'm going to say close contact as the name here, and I'm going to do symptoms as the name here. Now, what that does is it ties these 2 different yes/no radio inputs to the same name. So now when I go back, this changes yes or no based on, what I end up selecting. And then if I were to do, let's say, label HTML, remember, I want my user to be able to hit the word yes as well as hit no. So what I'm going to do is do HTML4, and then we'll do yes, and HTML4 here as no. And then we'll have to give this an ID. So ID equals no. And then ID equals yes. Now, the reality is that this isn't working because there's actually multiple that have the same ID. So I think what I'll do is I'll say something like, let's do yes, and then the name. So the name is going to be unique, but the way I'm differentiating is yes or no. And then similarly, I can do HTML4, no, or actually, I want this to be HTML4. And then get rid of this. And then I want the input to be ID equals. Okay, yeah, so this is going to be the yes option. This is going to be the no option. And I'm going to make sure that HTML4 and ID match and are different, and then no is going to need to match also, but it's going to be different. Not that it's going to have to be different from one another, but that needs to be different from the other ones that have no. So then if I were to refresh this and look, like I can probably use the label now. If I click on the label, it works. Now the reason for that is because the ID of this is no self-test. The ID of this is no close contact. The ID of this is no symptoms. So now that HTML, now that the browser can see like, okay, they're all unique, and now the labels point to a specific, unique, nothing else like it on the page item, then the labels will work. And this is kind of how you have to be specific with radio buttons, and how you actually like we have to really specify whenever we're using these reusable components, and then construct on the abstract. So like if we were just building all of these out of the box, we wouldn't have to do that. We could just have them side by side labeled properly. But because this component is reusable, and specifically because it's reusable, we actually have to do some fancy things that allow it to be dynamic, like use the label text prop, use the name prop to make the label unique so that I can click the label instead of just the radio input. The ID has to be unique. That's how HTML4 works, is by looking at an ID. I have to have a name, and the name has to be consistent across all the options of that radio field in order to make it work. So now that I have this, I have kind of this like more dynamic component over here, and now I'm reusing it, and now like all of the messiness that's over here is now kind of abstracted away, and now I can just worry about building something that looks a lot more intuitive for my for myself and for other developers on my team. So we're running out of time, but I just want to show one quick thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do set answer. I'm actually just going to do this as, let's say, false. I can explain why I want to do that, but essentially, like, and then the way I'm going to do this is, so if you remember, I actually consoled out that this is a string. So instead of it true or false, I'm going to say, I'm actually just going to say yes, and then no, to make it really clear. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say set answer is equal to yes. If that's true, then it's going to set it to true. If it's false, then it's going to set it to false. So that's how that's going to work. So I can actually see that. So console.log answer. And I'm just going to use this first one as an example. So if I go to console, and then if I do type of answer, then it'll be a Boolean, I think. Yep. So not a string, but a Boolean. Okay. So that's what I want. Now, the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to comment. Well, so remember in the flow chart, have you tested positive for COVID? Yes, I'm going to ask you this question. No, I'm going to ask this question. Okay. So essentially what I want is I want it to look like this, and then I want the different questions to pop up based on this. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say, okay, now I can do JavaScript. I can do JavaScript and JSX by doing this, okay? And then sometimes you'll see me like, you know, say if you do this, and then like this, that can also be the same as saying, you know, some condition if this is true, do this, else this. So this is the same thing if some condition foo else bar. So this is the same thing. So the way we're going to conditionally render this form is we're going to say if answer is true, render symptoms, else render have you come in close contact. Okay, so let's see how that works. So right now it's like this because it is false. So when it's false, it's rendering have you come in close contact. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say null. Actually, so if answer equals true, that's not going to work. Okay. So if answer this, so we could say if answer, you know, if answer is that, we also can say something like, actually, let's just do it this way. I'm going to do this. Say, so another way of saying conditionally rendered is by saying and. Okay. So what this does is it says, what is the value of answer? If it's false, then I'm not going to continue. If it's true, then I am going to continue. So that's one way we do it. We also do it with the question mark and the colon, just like I was talking about down here. So another way of writing this is also saying something like, you know, if answer there. We could also say something that's the opposite. So this is just how the logic, this is how logic and code often can look, right? So yes, no, oops. Oh, that's not what I want. I want this one. So see how it's changing the question based on what the answer is. Now, I need a way of making it to where it doesn't show until we answer this, but that's something we'll get to. But what I'm trying to show you is that, and I'll actually get rid of the and, because it actually doesn't gain me anything. I'd rather make it more clear by doing this. This sort of logic and this dynamic way of building this radio inputs is actually helping me build a more interesting application. And like, what's interesting is that like this exact application is something that I was contracted to build over COVID. And so like going through this like logic of like, have you had any symptoms and have you tested positive, all this kind of stuff. This is actually something that I've encountered in the real world as something that we built. So that was like the example of why we came up with this. And so we actually built it in React. A lot of this stuff was very, very similar. And now we still have this other pieces of this flow chart that we can actually build and continue to like build on top of in order to make a really, really dynamic application. And then whenever you get in the flowchart to a certain point, then you can have a button that says, okay, now you're ready to continue. And it might give you a message like, oh, you need to quarantine, or oh, you're good. You're no quarantine required. So using the reusable components, props, handlers, all this kind of stuff, this is how you would start this process. This is how you would get on building that. I'm going to push this, and I highly recommend playing around with it to see if you can continue on with the flowchart. I'll send a picture of the flowchart and just see how far you can get. But reality is that like we need to create more change handlers and more use state because all these are different. We need to keep track of these answers differently. And that's like the next step that you would go for if you were trying to actually build out the rest of the flow chart. So, okay, all right, everyone, that was a lot. But rewatch the video if you need. Ask us questions. We're going to kind of rehash a lot of this again using a different example. But this is a great opportunity for you to clarify where you're at, and then also get your hands dirty by trying to build the rest of this flow chart if that's, as a way of like kind of getting more familiar with these concepts. Because right now with this is like 90% of what you need in React. Besides the use effect, which we'll get into more. So, okie doke. If anyone needs to stay around, I'll be here. Sorry for going over, and we'll see you on Saturday. I'll stop recording now.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.